Hello, guys. Today we'll be presenting on behalf of Team Cheese. The presenters for today are myself, Francisco Renteria, and Carmen Quesada, and we will be discussing mannerism and Moro Lasso.
All right, so the first thing, before we start our actual presentation, I want you to take a look at this guy right here. He should look familiar. Team Prometheans should have talked about him. This is Don Carlo Gesualdo. He's going to be a very important part of our presentation, so I just wanted you to remember him. Okay, so the first thing we're going to be talking about mannerism. So this is a style in European art that emerged in the later years of the Italian High Renaissance, around 1520, and it lasted until about 1580 in Italy. This movement was a product of the Protestant Reformation, which is what we discussed last week in class. It's a rebellion against Renaissance humanism, and it emphasizes flamboyant stylization. In music, it emphasizes technical virtuosity and imitations of the dark and irrational. So basically what this means is during this era, both in arts, paintings, and in music, there was more expression, more drama, and more color. Just everything was brighter, everything was more. And this is important because in the beginning of the Renaissance period, things were already pretty magnificent and extravagant. But towards the end of the Renaissance, artists and musicians thought that they could surpass that, and they did with this movement. The word mannerism derives from the Italian word maniera, which means style or manner. So these are two examples of Mannerist art. You can see that it's very colorful and very pretty. The painting to the left, it's called the Madonna. It's a very famous painting by the Italian painter Parmigianino. And this is a very characteristic painting of that time period. Its proportions are elongated. The poses are highly stylized, and there is a lack of clear perspective, which is very common for this time period. We can't really tell where the woman's leg starts. There's just all sorts of weird things happening. Now, how does mannerism tie into music? Well, the rich musical possibilities in this era proved an attractive basis for the madrigal. And this type of song quickly rose to prominence as the preeminent musical form in Italian culture. We're not going to go into further detail of the madrigal because Act Natural Hextet is covering that. So if you haven't seen their video yet, watch them first. And then you can go back and watch our video. All right, so mannerism and Gesualdo's music. So as we said, mannerism is very dramatic, and so was Gesualdo's music. It is considered to be very extreme, so extreme that some 20th century critics and composers believed him to be a proto-serialist. For those of you that don't know what serialism is, it's that 20th century method of composition that uses a series of values to manipulate elements. Schoenberg was a pioneer of this method. And so for someone from the Renaissance period to be compared to Schoenberg is pretty intense. He must have been very innovative for his time period. His madrigals, they avoided pastoral and narrative poetry. And he preferred writing madrigals because they offer greater scope to the musical imagination. His madrigals used a great deal of chromaticism, which led to more dissonance than was accepted in practices of the late 16th century counterpoint. Every verbal image is matched by a separate musical formulation. This was Gesualdo's idea about music, about writing music. So every musical idea had to be very colorful, especially according to its text. The significance of the musical images is provided by conventional melodic, rhythmic, contrapuntal, and other figures. So as we said before, Mannerism is very dramatic, and Gesualdo was very, very dramatic in his music. His texts and his madrigals use words such as fire, death, and ardor for the abstraction of love. Okay, so I used this image because he was obsessed with the theme of life and death. And a lot of people thought that he used this a lot in his madrigals because he had this obsession with confession. So he was very religious and he would go confess. He was just like scared of death or something. And so most of his madrigals actually deal with this theme of life and death. Okay, so now we're going to listen to one of his madrigals. It's very dramatic, very chromatic. It modulates. It really doesn't sound like a Renaissance era piece. And so pay attention to everything that we've talked about when you're listening to this. Okay, so that just gave you a taste. That was one of his madrigals. Now moving on to one of his most famous madrigals, Moro Lasso. So before we go into the analysis and the theory behind it, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of it. So it was written for 5 voices, for soprano 1, soprano 2, alto, tenor, and bass. It's polyphonic, so every voice has equal importance. It's cut time throughout the entire piece. There's no written key signature, but various accidentals throughout the entire work. The form was inspired by the canzone stanza, which is a section of song or ballad, 2 or more lines long, characterized by common meter and rhyme. And it's through composed for the first 3/4 of the piece. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the lyrics right now. Not too much because we're going to go into further depth later on into the presentation. They're originally in Latin, though. I'm not going to read the Latin for you, but I'll read for you the English translation. This is the opening line. It says, "I shall die, O miserable me, in my suffering, and the one who could give me life, alas, gives me death." So this is, once again, very dramatic. Just as we've been talking about with the whole movement of Mannerism and with Gesualdo. This madrigal is about unrequited love, and it's just, yeah, very dramatic. Okay, so these are the first couple of systems in the madrigal. And we're just going to talk about them a little bit. So there is a musical motive that keeps reappearing. If you can see right here where my mouse is in measure 6, oh, actually, never mind. Starting here, measure 7, we have 2 1/8 notes followed by 4 16th notes followed by 2 quarter notes. We keep getting it in all of the voices. So it starts out in soprano 1, and then we get it in soprano 2, and then we get it in the alto section, and then let me move on to the next page, and then we get it in the tenor, and then the bass. Okay. So this piece is unusual. We can't really make sense of what is happening harmonically. There doesn't seem to be a concrete key signature. It starts off with a C sharp major chord, um, and it goes down kind of chromatically from there. The first couple of measures are they're all the same rhythm. Um, and it starts out slow rhythmically, which adds to the drama. It gives it tension, and then it starts moving along faster rhythmically as we progress with the piece, as you can see with the eighth notes and 16th notes, and as it continues doing so with all of the voices. Okay, now moving on. So the end of the piece, it ends on an A major chord with an authentic cadence of 5/1. Um, Now, many of the major triads throughout the piece are actually in different versions, so it's very chromatic throughout. Okay, and yeah, that's pretty much it. So now we're going to listen to some of it so you can hear how dramatic it is and how chromatic. Okay, that's all we're going to listen to for now. And now we're going to move on to Frank's part of the presentation.
Okay, guys. So, as you guys now know, Gesualdo's Moro Lasso is very dramatic. He uses a lot of connotation with the lyrics that he chooses. He also, for his time, he's sort of trying to incorporate all of these chromaticism, harmonies, and melodies that are sort of innovative during his time. And so, as the lyrics say, I'm sure you remember some of them. These are the lyrics in Italian. Pardon me, in Latin. And here we have them translated. Carmen mentioned them earlier, and essentially, I just want you to catch some of the words in its translation. So you see the word die, miserable me, suffering, give me life, kills, unwilling, oh painful fate, and the very last line, death. So you can see that his lyrics for Moro Lasso are very, very, very dramatic and to some extent very personal and heartfelt. So, of course, you can make the conclusion that his music should emulate some of these words and, the sound of what some of these words express. So, a little bit over Moro Lasso again. It's a madrigal from his sixth book. It's a tragic lament about a deserted lover dying in his pain. Moro Lasso receives its famous reputation from its conviction, extreme stylization on orthodox relationships, all which are reflected in the text. And again, this is just another example of what we just mentioned. The structure of the piece is organized by alternating sections of faster counterpoint with slow chromaticism. Both complement each other through verbal images that repeat to create harmonic contrast. So again, you see how he's starting to use chromaticism to really convey some of these lyrics that he's come up with. So the piece receives its sorrowful disposition from the use of very low voices and movements of notes in slow motion, as well as semi-tonal melodies. So at some points, the relationship between the lyrics and the music, one of our members noticed that when the text gets more sorrowful, the very low voices sort of stand out and the notes sort of move in a slower motion. When harmony is finally reached, the dissonances and leaps give the sound a violent and bitter sound. So again, just emphasizing how the music is reacting to the lyrics. The first line, Moro Lasso al mío, shows that immediately with extremely slow chromatic movements, allowing the listener to quickly interpret the somber mood of the piece. Again, this is basically just how does the music tie in with the lyrics. So here we're just going to talk about the bizarre voice entrances in the first portion, which helps elaborate the lyrics. Again, remember that the first line says, "I shall die, oh miserable me, and my suffering." So you see how voice entrances are not what you would have expected during that time period. Okay, we're also going to talk about word painting. So it's almost like a melisma, in my opinion. I think that Vita, when Carmen explained how there's a lot of movement on that particular word, Vita translates to life. So I guess you can think about life as fast moving with momentum, and just the 8th note to 16th note um, beat can accelerate the rhythmic motion, and so then it's just live, you keep on moving forward. And so again, this is just how the lyrics helps him come up with the music, or how the music helps him come up with the lyrics, the relationship that both coexist within each other. Here you see, we'll just go over. The listener is able to hear at this point the dramatic use of radical dissonance and extreme registers. So I'm not exactly sure where this in the music happens, but if you actually take the time to go and listen, the lyrics, when they get the most emotional and the most, I guess, feeling with the certain words like death and fade and painful, then there's a lot of radical dissonance and extreme registers, which at that time was not very common, which is why Carmen brought up the idea that in his time he was sort of this very innovative composer. So we'll just skip this for now, and we'll talk about the way it ends. So the madrigal now ends in the textual inversion through the dilemma of the lyrics. I, me, do, morte is introduced diatonically, and the entire entries are spaced at irregular intervals, which is common through the piece when using imitative voices. So again, he's using melodic contour and harmonic elements to express that last line, which translates to "Alas gives me death." So now we're going to talk about the madrigal. Just a little bit, the groups before us elaborated on it, but just a little brief summary. It's just a musical form of the 20th century in Italy. It was the most popular form of secular polyphony in the 16th century. The madrigal is that form of musical art in which the art spirit of the Italian Renaissance attained its purest expression. Intended for a narrowly restricted social circle in its artificiality and conventionality. So, we just spoke about Moro Lasso, and what we're going to do for the remainder of the presentation, we're going to be comparing Moro Lasso by Gesualdo and Dalle Bel Contrade d'Oriente by Cipriano de Rore. So I'm going to be playing a little bit of Moro Lasso and Gesualdo's De la Belle. So here is Moro Lasso. Okay, now we'll be listening a little bit of Rore de la Belle Contrade d'Oriente. Okay, good. Right away, you should have made, an assumption on contrast. You can clearly see how Moro Lasso is very different from Rores piece, Dale Belle Contrade de Oriente. So just a little bit of comparison and scoring for both of the pieces. Both of the madrigals are written for 5 voices. Dale Belle Contrade d'Oriente contains some word painting, which again is sort of melismatic sounding. Moro Lasso al mio duolo contains an extensive use of word painting. For example, the first word is moro, which translates to I shall die. This can be felt from the beginning of the piece in the first 2 chords. It gives a sense of, that something is wrong. And again, this sense of something is wrong, I'm guessing, was associated with the tonality or the harmonic and melodic components of Moro Lasso. For dynamics, as it was common in the time, no dynamics are written for either of the pieces. For rhythm, both are written in cut time and have various rhythms. Dale Belle Contrade d'Oriente uses more movement in the beginning of the piece. Moro Lasso al mio duolo contains more 8th notes and 16 notes. The most used note lengths in both of the pieces as a similarity are whole notes and half notes. So the melody. The melody trades off between the voices through all of the piece in both pieces. So the melody trades off between voices equally or just between all voices for both of the examples. All voices sing the same lyrics and similar line contour at different times, one after the other. In Dale Belle Contrade d'Oriente, it can be heard from the beginning to measure 8. So the harmony. One technique that both of the pieces use frequently is suspensions to create dissonance between harmonies. Moro Lasso al mio duolo uses extensive chromaticism to help one chord go to the next. As you heard in the example, it's very chromatic. It sounds very different from Dale Belle Contrade d'Oriente, which, in my opinion, sounds a lot more. It sounds more of a normal tonality that would have been acceptable at the time. And you can see that it's more consonant and the key is more consistent and can be noted by the use of less accidentals. Both of the pieces contain many cadences. In Dale Belle Contrade d'Oriente, the final is F. Moro Lasso al mio duolo, the final is an A, something that was not common at the time of composition. So the texture. For both of these pieces, the texture is polyphonic harmony, which was common in madrigals. Even though 5 voices are used, most chords formed are triads. So again, even though there was, at the time of composition, during that time, even though there was 5 voices, you wouldn't, I don't know, which chord has 5 notes? A crazy chord. They would still stick to triads. So form. The form in both of the pieces is thorough composed. However, in Moro Lasso, a repeat is used at measure 53 to the ending of the piece in measure 69. The lyrics. Okay, so a little bit about the lyrics. We already explored how the lyrics for Moro Lasso are very, 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 very dramatic and not common at the time. Both are written in Italian. Dale Belle Contrade d'Oriente lyrics are about sad love and losing the love of their life. The lyrics to Moro Lasso are about how one that gives them life is also the one that causes the most suffering and can take it away. In the Le Belle Contrade d'Oriente, the person is happy in the beginning and begins to feel pain later on. So, I know we've seen a bunch of lyric slides, and so then this is just pretty neat because you can see the original language lyrics and the way that they translate, and you can kind of see how some of these words sound. For example, vita, which is life, sounds different than morte. Morte has a stronger connotation, which is death. And so you can see how maybe the composer was keeping this in mind while composing the madrigal. These are the lyrics for Dale Belle, and it's the same concept. So now, for our questions, question 1 is, when and where did Mannerism arise? Question 2 is, what were prominent themes in Gesualdo's music. And number 3 is more of an open question that you guys can feel free to discuss. And essentially, it's just in Gesualdo's Moro, Lasso, the lyrics stand out as an important component of the work. Do you think that Gesualdo's musical ideas in his composition reflect the lyrics and their meaning? Do the lyrics influence the overall musical work? For example, the tonality, harmony, and melodic contour. Thank you.